You know what? The only attention I wanted to was to shine a light on some of the racist and hateful views that are expressed.
Tonight, a COVID comment controversy erupts into a Facebook food fight showdown.
Of course, with our public health measures, I don't think we can just rely on the vaccines alone to be the silver bullet.
Canada continues to sound the alarm of preventing the spread of the COVID-19 virus.
Oh, we had bad water quality. The old plant was very old. Every week we were pretty much patching, getting things to work into the next week.
And he manages water for North Battleford, Saskatchewan, and his home reserve. His rippling words on Canada's never-ending First Nation water troubles. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. It promises to be a new weapon in the fight against COVID. Today, Health Canada approved AstraZeneca to be used across the country. It's a third vaccine now available, along with Pfizer and Moderna, but its effectiveness is only 62%. Here's Jamie Pashagumstam with more on that.
During today's briefing, Dr. Supriya Sharma defended AstraZeneca's effectiveness. She said it meets Health Canada's standards of at least 50%, and it stacks up well against yearly flu vaccines.
If we compare that to the influenza viruses that we authorize every year, if you look back, for example, just to last year, the effectiveness of the flu vaccine against the most common strain was about 64%. Across to the next common strain was about 54%. So 64% and 54% approximately. So these vaccines do have a use.
Health Canada says the introduction of a new vaccine is important, but people still need to keep public measures in place.
There are other factors to consider as well, the emergence of variants. And of course, with our public health measures, I don't think we can just rely on the vaccines alone to be the silver bullet.
Canada's Chief Medical Officer, Theresa Tam, says controlling a third wave will be more difficult because of the new, more contagious COVID-19 variants. And so far, the vaccines appear to be effective, but there have been reports of adverse events following immunization.
These reports include any medical event that occurs following immunization, but is not necessarily related to the vaccine or the immunization process. A total of 167 of these reports to date, about 1 in 9,000 doses administered, were considered serious, such as severe allergic reaction.
Dr. Sharma insists vaccination benefits far outweigh risks and points to the tens of thousands of people vaccinated in clinical trials.
The number of cases of people that died from COVID-19 that got vaccine was 0. The number of people that were hospitalized because their COVID-19 disease was so severe was 0.
Procurement Minister Anita Anand said Canada has secured an additional 2 million doses of AstraZeneca, 500,000 to arrive in the coming weeks, with the remaining 1.5 million by the middle of May. Jamie Pashagumstam, APTN National News, Ottawa.
William Walter Amo, an inmate at the Headingley Correctional Centre, died earlier this month after an incident with correctional officers. Today, family and friends held a caravan ride to honor him. Amo died a week after an altercation with correctional officers left him in hospital. The family held a funeral on Tuesday, and red ribbons were placed on vehicles as they made their way towards Headingley Correctional Centre. The family then laid a wreath. Amo is from Saugeen First Nation. Chief Derek Henderson says Amo's death was preventable.
Today is a symbol of, the injustices of our people, right? Today is Aboriginal Justice Day, right? And, we want to let people know that it's important that our people are treated with respect, especially when you're in custodial care of a correctional facility. And the end result is death of that individual.
A former NDP candidate and Indigenous leader in Kenora, Ontario, found herself on the OPP's frequent call list after she drew attention to an offensive social media post that claimed Indigenous people with COVID were spitting on produce at a local grocery store. As Daryl Stranger explains, pointing out the comment ended up causing more of a stir than the original comment itself.
The northwestern Ontario town of Kenora is getting plenty of attention, including from at least one politician in Ottawa, but for all the wrong reasons. A Facebook post in a Kenora rant and rave group said people from the nearby Indigenous community of White Dog, currently gripped by a COVID-19 outbreak, were not isolating. A comment below that accused them of traveling more than an hour to Kenora to spit on produce at grocery stores to spread the virus. Tanya Cameron took a screenshot of the wild claim and shared it on her Facebook page as an example of anti-Indigenous rhetoric. But the Ontario Provincial Police then contacted her to remove the posts, saying the commenter was getting threats. Cameron says they've contacted her 2 more times since, hoping she could get people to stop the backlash against a non-Indigenous commenter.
We would do that in any scenario, no matter who the complainant was. We respond to calls that we get and try and mitigate situations. This isn't something that was a proactive approach on our part to call and ask to take that post down. It was a complaint received from the public that we were investigating and responded to.
Cameron feels an Indigenous woman wouldn't get the same level of service from police if she said something offensive online and received backlash. Inspector Duggan says he doesn't believe the woman is related to anyone in the OPP, something that had been widely speculated as why police were so concerned. Meanwhile, because of the post, some First Nations people have come forward saying they have been denied services at certain stores in Kenora. Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Grand Council of Treaty 3, and even Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller say the racism must end. Cameron says she just wanted to call these people out.
You know what? The only attention I wanted was to shine a light on some of the racist and hateful views that are expressed. And that's all I was doing. I did not put words in. There was 2 women that expressed views, and I was just shining a light on how ugly people's views in this town can be.
Now, the woman who posted the comment on Facebook works with Firefly, a company that provides a variety of services for children, youth, and families in northwestern Ontario, many of whom are Indigenous. Now, Firefly said that an investigation is ongoing to determine if any discipline will happen. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
We want to hear what you think about this story. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and now TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Coming up after the break, an in-depth look at the challenges water operators in Saskatchewan are facing.
We're very fortunate to have Nathan and Ed because they really don't get paid according to everybody else. I'd say on a national scale, they're kind of doing it as a favor to their community, right?
We head to Saskatchewan, where some communities who struggle to produce clean drinking water also have trouble retaining qualified staff to oversee those efforts. The Trudeau government has spent more than $1.7 billion since 2015 in order to address water issues on First Nations. But that funding hasn't gone far enough to close the wage gap for on-reserve water operators. A recent investigation in collaboration with APTN News, Global News, the Saskatoon Star Phoenix, universities and colleges across the country, led by Concordia's Institute for Investigative Journalism, has found water operators on First Nations can sometimes make less than half of what their counterparts would make. APTN's Priscilla Wolf has the story.
Like I said, it's a lot of moving parts that you really got to orchestrate.
Nathan Martel is the water treatment plant operator on the Moosomin First Nation, 175 kilometers from Saskatoon. He also works as wastewater treatment plant supervisor for the city of North Battleford. He's been doing both jobs for the past 15 years. The community's water plant was built in 2014 to replace their original plant built in the 50s or 60s.
Oh, we had bad water quality. The old plant was very old. Every week we were pretty much patching, getting things to work to the next week. Our chemical feed was so high because our water quality was so poor that we were spending way above average of what we should have been spending for chemical feed. And water quality, it was horrible. and that affected the whole reserve with the plumbing and everything else.
Journalism students working with a consortium of universities and media outlets led by Concordia University's Institute for Investigative Journalism conducted a survey of water plant operators, managers, and public works employees from 122 First Nations across Canada in 2020. It found that 2/3 of water operators on First Nations were earning lower than the median wage of operators in their province, sometimes close to minimum wage, while often on call 24/7. That's in part because even though the federal government has known for years that First Nations are underfunded for the operation and maintenance of on-reserve water and wastewater systems, Indigenous Services Canada hasn't updated its funding formulas since 1998. After Justin Trudeau's Liberals took power in 2015, the federal government promised it would end all long-term boil water advisories in First Nation communities, those lasting longer than a year, by March 2021. The government has since acknowledged that that timeline will not be met. Since 2015, the government has invested more than $1.74 billion of targeted funds in water and wastewater projects on reserves. However, most of that funding was intended for new construction and major upgrades, not operations and maintenance. O&M costs include the salaries of the water operators and public works personnel who work in water treatment plants and distribution systems, as well as the cost of replacement parts, supplies, chemicals used to treat water, electricity, and inspections. Mark Miller, Minister of Indigenous Services, says he realizes that First Nations are underfunded and water operators are underpaid.
Why should they get paid less than someone working off reserve, quote, I guess off reserve, quote unquote? And that's the reality of working in what is a state-of-the-art system operated by highly trained individuals that do take, it does take some time to train people up.
The consequences of insufficient funding extends beyond operators' salaries. In a 2018 presentation obtained by the consortium, ISC officials suggested underfunding of O&M contributes to infrastructure failing prematurely. An annual report from 2018 noted that only 77% of inspected water and wastewater systems on reserve were projected to remain operational for their life cycles. Nearly 23% of respondents to the consortium's survey said they don't have enough funding to run their water treatment plants and distribution systems. Another 11% expressed other funding-related concerns, like that it takes too long to get funding for emergency repairs. The Saskatchewan First Nations Water Association did a survey of Saskatchewan water treatment plant operators in 2019, and salaries range from $20,000 to $60,000 annually. In its statement, ISC said that while responsibility for safe drinking water on reserves is shared between First Nation communities and the federal government, First Nations are the owner of their water and wastewater systems and responsible for their daily operation and management. The chief of Moosomin, Bradley Swiftwell, says water operators like Martel are the livelihood of their community.
We're very fortunate to have Nathan and Ed because they really don't get paid according to everybody else. I'd say on a national scale. They're kind of doing it as a favor to their community, right?
Swiftwolf adds, without men like Martel sacrificing time and wages, they wouldn't be able to afford 3 water operators in Moosomin. He says the government doesn't give them enough to cover wages.
They have their own formula, right, that they utilize. And for Moosomin, it's $40,000 based on the water treatment plant that we have.
That formula is outdated, according to experts and the government itself. But despite over 3 years of negotiations, there is still no official policy change to address this shortfall. Chief Swiftwolf thinks ISC should offer more money for water plant operators to keep them working on reserve. Last December, Minister Miller announced that the government will provide another $616.3 million over 6 years for operations and maintenance at on-reserve water and wastewater plants. In a statement, his department said the new funding will help First Nations retain qualified water operators.
A lot of times we're dependent on on federal funding, and if you don't, we haven't really seen an increase. We did see a small increase because of the change in the facility, but it's just not enough.
The band struggles to even pay the $1,000 every 2 weeks that Martel and his colleagues receive. He says the community is lucky that they have been able to retain these employees. Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Moosomin First Nation.
Stick with us. We'll be back after this short break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Deb and Paula are enjoying the outdoors and having some fun in the snow near Great Spirit Island, Manitoulin Island in Ontario. Thank you, Deb, for sharing that picture. We invite all of our viewers, that means you, to send us your photos to share@aptn.ca, and your photo might be our next photo of the day. Now let's look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Here is tomorrow's weather forecast beginning on the East Coast. 0 in Charlottetown, 1 above in Halifax, -4 in Nain, -6 in La Grande River, 2 above in Val d'Or, 1 above in Quebec City, 6 degrees and cloudy in Toronto, 7 above in London, 2 degrees in Wawa and Timmins in Sudbury. In northern Manitoba, a chilly -28 with sun in Churchill, -20 in God's Lake, -15 in Gimli, 14 below in Brandon. In Saskatchewan, -12 with a mix of sun and cloud in Saskatoon, -14 in Yorkton, 16 below in La Ronge, and -25 in Stony Rapids. In northern Alberta, -10 in Peace River, 4 below with some sun in Grand Prairie, -6 and snow in Calgary, -4 in Medicine Hat. Over to the west coast, 5 degrees in Vancouver and Kamloops. 1 above in Smithers, -12 in Fort Nelson. In the Yukon, -9 in Mayo and Dawson. Over to the NWT, 33 below with sunny skies in Watee, -30 in Yellowknife. -34 in Colville Lake, -29 in Sax Harbor. In Nunavut, -34 in snow in Baker Lake, -36 in Whale Cove. 21 below in Clyde River, -31 in Igloolik. We have some incredible video to show you now of a massive iceberg as it breaks off from Antarctica. The iceberg is about the same size as the city of Los Angeles. Aerial footage taken just 10 days ago, before the iceberg formed, shows the large crack stretching into the distance. This was a big month for Inuktitut television and Inuit. Uvagut TV had their official kickoff. The Inuktitut television network first hit the airwaves back in January, but earlier this month was the official launch. It is part of Igloolik's Izuma TV, and features a generations-long catalog of Inuktitut programming from half a dozen Inuktitut producers. You can see them on local co-op cable in many Nunavut communities, online, and on Shaw Cable. For today's celebration, they called in a big name in Inuktitut music, Nunavut's Beatrice Deer. After nearly 2 years and over 500 hours of restoration work, a rare ceremonial hood will be repatriated back to the Cree Cultural Institute in Ujabu-Magu. It's been sitting in a Montreal museum since the 1940s. Researchers from the Cree Cultural Institute found the hood listed in the catalog of the Lachine Museum back in 2019. Exactly how the hood ended up in Montreal is unknown. The piece dates back to approximately 1850 and likely belonged to Jane Gunner, wife of a former Grand Chief of Mistissini. To Cree Nation Grand Chief Abel Bosom, the hood is much more than just an artifact.
In this sense, this object, this beaded hood, speaks to us in a way that it cannot speak to anyone else. For many other people, it's just that, an object, certainly a beautiful object. But for us, for the Cree people, it is full of meaning that we can feel, meaning that touches us in a very deep way. It is an object that connects us with our ancestors and which connects us with our ancient cultural tradition.
Long-term care in Canada is in a state of emergency, especially with elders both on and off reserve. Reporter Brittany Guillot is here to talk about one care home in northern Manitoba where every resident caught COVID-19. Brittany, thanks for taking the time to chat with us today. Can you tell us about the issues you uncovered at the Rod McGillivray home in northern Manitoba?
Yeah, so one of the things we found is that there are only 2 personal care homes on reserve that are provincially licensed and subject to routine inspection reporting in Manitoba. So the Rod McGillivray Care Home is run by the OCN Health Authority and is not actually under provincial oversight. And in fact, there are no national standards for long-term care in Canada. Another thing we found is that long-term care funding in some years had been frozen and even reduced for several years leading up to the COVID-19 pandemic, of course causing further strain in terms of administering services to those in need.
Now, why were people so reluctant to speak out?
Yeah, so many of the people we spoke with in actually both episodes on long-term care were reluctant to speak with us out of fear of retribution. And in a few cases, they had actually been treated poorly for speaking up and speaking to media about the issues they were witnessing and experiencing. So the 2 women we spoke to in OCN decided to speak anonymously because they were worried that their families would be kicked out of the care home. And in northern Manitoba, it's quite challenging to find appropriate long-term care services.
Throughout this investigation, what were you hearing were some of the solutions, or are some of the solutions?
Yeah, so many of the people we spoke to about this suggested that there's a need for an elders advocate, sort of in the same way as there's a children's advocate. And this would be to adequately address the needs of elders in the province and to make sure that their voices are heard and listened to. Another solution that all of the long-term care experts we talked to said there needs to be an end to the jurisdictional disputes over who is supposed to be funding services for Indigenous people. They said there needs to be clear guidelines on who is accountable for these services, whether that's at the federal or the provincial level.
Right, well, thank you again. I'm looking forward to part 2. Thanks for joining us, Brittany.
Thank you.
The Elder Gap Part 2 airs on APTN Investigates, coming up in just a few moments. Thanks for joining us tonight. That's your APTN National News for this Friday, February 26th. You can find us 24/7 on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at APTN News. I'm Brittany Hobson. Have a great night.